He's one of the few. He's one of the proud. He's a Marine. And he's our guest on this morning's Carolina People. Meet him coming up next. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at Bell & Bell, Buick, Pontiac, GMC at the intersection of Highway 9 and 31 here at the Big Red Bell. We're focused on the U.S. Marine Corps and Part 2 of Lieutenant Colonel Joe Paschall of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Good morning.
Morning, Greg.
Lieutenant Colonel Paschall, yesterday you said it's okay if we called you Joe. Are you still okay with that?
I suppose so.
I know you're heading back to Iraq this weekend, so we're only going to keep you here 30 minutes. So you're heading out of Lejeune.
Yes.
Wow, you were sharing yesterday, that's a heck of a trip back, a 3 or 4 day trip back.
Oh yeah, it's pretty long. I think they design it that way so that you almost look forward to getting to what you call home in Iraq once you get there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be too much fun. But you actually look forward to that little bed in Iraq in your own little home.
That little bed in Iraq. What are some of the things that, I know there's a lot of things you shared yesterday and off camera, a lot of things you can't talk about clearly, particularly with this airing on the internet, to go online this weekend. And so there's a lot of things you can't talk about, particulars over there, but there are things you can do and can't do. I know the director had asked you a question about can you have a beer on the flight back on any of the layovers, and
yeah, there's no alcohol. It's a pretty ascetic monk-like existence over there. Of course, no sex, no alcohol, no pornography, and those are all things that we've acclimatized our military to sort of be a little bit more accommodating of the culture in which we're coexisting over there, the Middle Eastern culture. This really goes back to Desert Storm. Even when I was in Desert Storm, there was no alcohol, but it also gets back to the essence of some of the problems we had in Vietnam. When you're in stressful situations like in Vietnam and like currently exist in Iraq, I think a lot of the troops would choose to sort of lubricate themselves at the end of a tough, stressful day by hitting a bottle. Were a bottle available, or drugs, or God forbid anything else you got available, because a lot of our Marines and soldiers over there are in they see some pretty rough things during the course of a day. Out on patrol, you might have some friends killed or something. They're in a stressful environment. Even the staff, staff weenies like myself, fairly stressful days. And just about every day at the end of the day, I commonly think I could really use a drink.
Right.
And if I had a drink, I probably would have one or two. And it's probably better that we don't have alcohol at all, because I could use a drink, but I don't have one. And so at the end of the 6 months or a year or whatever, you just come back a little cleaner of your vices, and you learn how to cope with stress without alcohol or anything else. So maybe it's a positive thing.
That's a great point.
It's still kind of rough.
That's all the services, though.
Yes,
all the
actually,
services that are in.
As I understand it, it's a theater thing within the Central Command area of responsibility, which is the entire Middle East. So even like naval forces in Kuwait, they will only be able to drink on the bases down there in Kuwait at the port. Mm-hmm. But we, can't drink anywhere in Iraq at all.
Mm-hmm. Joe, you shared with us yesterday 20 years now direct in the Marine, 20 years next June. You will have served in the Marines for 20 years, not counting the 4 years as you shared yesterday of ROTC there at Duke while you were a student. We didn't talk any at all. I wanted to have you share for a few minutes about rugby. You were a rugby player there at Duke. Were you actually competitive, a rugby player there?
Well, I don't know. It depends on your frame of reference as to competitive. I did compete, sometimes better than others. But, rugby is something I picked up throughout the years. And I actually was playing up until a couple of years ago. Only reason I stopped is because now, at the advanced age of 40, it's harder to compete against 20-year-olds, when you're 40, even in rugby. When I was up in D.C. Most recently, I left there in 2005, they have what's called an old boys rugby league, which you have to be 35. So everybody in the entire league is over 35. For me, that was like being 18 again, because for so many years I've been competing with 20-year-olds that when all of a sudden I'm competing with 35, 40, 45-year-olds, all of a sudden I'm one of the faster, stronger ones again. And it was great. But then you come back down to Camp Lejeune, where I'm currently stationed. They don't have an old boys league, so the only option would be to play with the base team, which again is the 20-year-olds. And I could still do that, and I've competed at that level before. I find that I can still compete at that level just fine, but it'll take me a week or two to recover, whereas it used to take a day or two when I was 20 years old.
Right.
And you get the point of diminishing returns. How much is it really worth to compete for that hour and a half on the rugby field? And I got to pay the price. Plus, having 4 small kids, as my wife commonly reminds me, my job is to sit on the sideline at their games and not play in my own while they watch me. And so she's had to remind me of that the past few years, because when I was playing up in D.C., my son would be the water boy for my team, and then I coached his rugby team. He was
you're
playing.
Kidding, Joe, Little Joe, you call him Little, or Joe, or you got a lot of nicknames for him. That's right. He's playing rugby as well.
He did. Now? He played 1 year. They don't have, in big metropolitan areas like D.C. or maybe Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and Atlanta even, they have a lot more demand for the niche sports like rugby, and so they actually had rugby for kids as early as 6 to 8 years. Really? And of course, they have rugby leagues going as late as like 50-year-old rugby leagues.
Right.
Now you get back to Jacksonville, and there's no rugby for kids, and it's only one rugby team in Jacksonville, North Carolina. That's the Camp Lejeune Misfits, the base team. So my son can't play, and I can't really play unless I'm willing to get on the field with the young guys anymore.
I can't really picture the sport, Joe. Is it? It's kind of a mix of football. Are you wearing helmets or pads or anything?
No. The funny thing about rugby is it actually evolved from soccer back in 1823 over in Rugby, England. There was actually a school called the Rugby School. That's thus the name rugby. But there was this one guy, William Webb Ellis, who decided, with a total disregard for the sport, to pick up the soccer ball and run with it. And then people thought that was a good idea. And then people, once you pick the ball up and run with it, other people tackle you. They developed it into what was called the rugby game. And then it just became called rugby, named after the School of Rugby, England. And when we were stationed in England, I had the opportunity to make the pilgrimage back to the rugby players' mecca of Rugby, England. And I stood on the original rugby field and went to the original rugby shop where the first rugby balls were made. Had Little Joe's picture taken in front of the first rugby field.
That's great.
Yeah, it was like making a pilgrimage back to Mecca. But I intend on playing again. If when I retire, if I happen to get take a job at a larger metropolitan area like even Charlotte or something, where they have old boys rugby teams, I'm not really going to play again with 20-year-olds, but I'll play in over 35 in a heartbeat, because if you stay in shape through the years, it's easy enough to continue playing against guys your own age.
Sure. You've got a son. You've also got 3. You and Sue have 3 girls as well.
Oh, yes.
What's that like? You and Joe are outnumbered in the household 4-2. Well, and then your mom's around a lot. It's 5-2.
Oh yeah. Well, the dog's a girl too, so yeah, she weighs her vote in there. But son and I, we have to stick together. We say that the 2 Joe's votes count, for 6 or 7 women's votes. So that's kind of how we try to play that card occasionally. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work often, yeah. You and Sue have been married now. I remember, obviously, Rob and Luke and I, and even Dad took part in your wedding. We still have those pictures all over the place. I think it was the first time the 4 Everett guys were together in tuxedos, Joe. We love those pictures. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
That was in the early 90s?
13 years ago, 1994.
94. That's exactly right, 94. That's amazing. It was in the fall of 94.
Yeah.
That's tremendous. Y'all have a thing coming up soon, 14 years or 13 years.
Yeah, 13th year anniversary. Unfortunately, I won't be there for that one, but I think Sue's kind of gotten used to over the years. I'll miss the occasional anniversary being gone somewhere.
Right.
But I'm hoping after this next year, I'm hoping to be there for all the rest of them.
All the rest of them.
And birthdays as well. Spending a year in Iraq. I think one of the roughest things about it, outside of just being away from family, is miss everybody's sports season and everybody's birthday and every holiday.
Right.
Back in years previous, most of my deployments were 6-month deployments.
Sure.
And you can always tell yourself, okay, well, I'm going to miss the summer, but I'll be home for Christmas. Or Daddy's going to miss Christmas, but Daddy will be home when the pool opens.
Right.
For a year, when you're gone a year, there's nothing you can say. You're just, okay, Daddy will be home next year this time.
That's right.
Sorry I'm missing everything for a year. But
Joe, that's the same way for so many in the services.
Well, and a lot of folks in the Army, are actually doing 15-month tours, some a little bit longer, and that's pretty arduous, especially for some of our folks over there being reservists, and they really Whereas, arguably, it's my job to be going over there and doing these kind of things as an active duty Marine. Our reservists really are kind of, they sign up as weekend warriors, a lot of them, and they really never see themselves deploying for a year and a half away from their families because they actually have to leave their career to go play soldier somewhere, whereas my career is over there with me. So I
can't even fathom that, Joe. You're
me
right.
either, but I served with them enough over the years where you learn to empathize. You think, gosh, these guys, it's a whole different set of dynamics for them.
Right. Very difficult, and I'm glad you highlighted that because there are a heck of a lot of folks that give up a lot to be able to experience that and to serve their country. For you, over the 19 years, Joe, you shared yesterday 3.5 years at Pendleton, obviously much of your time at Lejeune. But for you, you have experienced overseas quite a bit. What are some of the highlights over that 19-year tenure? Any of them that stick out? I know Kosovo, I think you've been to a couple times, Bosnia. Any memorable stories
plenty
on a Friday morning?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, plenty of them, both good and bad, memorable stories. But, over the years, either I've been really unfortunate or very fortunate to hit most of the high points. I came in '88, and there hadn't been too much going on up to that period. But then, Desert Storm hit right away, and so I was in Desert Storm as a lieutenant. And then within a year of that, I went back and we were off the coast of Yugoslavia when that all collapsed in '92. The next year, I was headed to Somalia and then to Rwanda to do the evacuation of our embassy there. And then the year after that, I was headed back to the Gulf. Saddam Hussein was doing more saber rattling. And then after that, I was in Bosnia in '97, Kosovo in '98, and then took a little bit of a hiatus to go to school for about a year, and then back into Kosovo in 2002, Horn of Africa, and then Iraq 2003, and now this is my second trip back to Iraq. So been fairly busy on your tax dollars over the years. But, I think the most interesting of my deployments was probably Kosovo.
Really?
In '98, because whereas most of my deployments are your standard, you go somewhere with a group of Marines as part of your unit, wearing military uniforms, and there's certain understanding of what your environment and what the dynamics will be when you deploy as part of a Marine force. In Kosovo, I deployed as part of a State Department mission, which meant that I was not in uniform, not armed. I was wearing civilian clothes the entire time.
Really?
And it was interesting.
You said not armed. Were there ever instances where not being armed caused some level of fear beyond?
I'm not sure. Most Marines would say, it's horrible. You need to be armed if you're in the situation, because I was in the middle of the Civil War in '98 between the Serbs and the Kosovars. But in retrospect, there were a lot of situations I was in that had I been armed, my armament would have been a 9mm service pistol. That's what an officer would carry. I was a major at the time. And, if 10 other guys have AK-47s trained on you and you draw a 9mm pistol, you just got yourself killed. Whereas if you're disarming and disarmed in civilian clothes and they've got AKs on you, you're not threatening to them. And so I don't know. I don't know if it made me feel more uneasy being unarmed or less uneasy. But I think it's an accurate statement to say that had I been armed in that situation, I probably would have gotten myself killed.
Is that right, Joe?
You look at being a Marine. A Marine in a situation like that, if someone threatens you, the first thing you'll think to do is draw your weapon. You're not necessarily going to think there are more of them than me, so I shouldn't draw my weapon, because as a Marine, you're used to being with a larger group of people. That's just your instinct. You're used to be in any conflict. You wouldn't think twice about drawing your weapon because you always assume you have superior firepower on your side. In that case, I didn't, and it'd be too late once you draw your weapon. So
you'd be dead. Wow.
That was probably my most stressful deployment because of just the weirdness, the inherent weirdness of being trained as a Marine for X amount of years, deploying as a Marine, and being in conflict situations as a Marine, and now you're in the middle of someone else's war. Your training is as a Marine, but you are essentially a civilian for all practical purposes. You're essentially a State Department observer, which is supposed to be neutral, supposed to not get engaged. And it's hard when you have the mentality of a Marine to not get engaged in a confrontational situation. Just everything from an argument to drawing a weapon. But when all you've got is a Leatherman tool, you can't get yourself in too much trouble.
We wrapped up yesterday's interview trying to get ready for today, highlighting that aspect of your service as an officer to the enlisted in the Marines. I think you also said it's that way in the Army, and there's some differences, not to highlight anything that's potentially perceived negatively in the Navy or in the Air Force, but you highlighted some of those differences. What are some of those for viewers who may have missed you yesterday, Joe, just that difference in the the Army, but between the Air Force and the Navy?
I think it kind of grows out of the culture and how the ground forces have evolved from the naval sea forces. And the Marine Corps, it's said that, we go both ways because we've got to go to sea with the Navy and technically are part of naval forces. But yet, case in point, Iraq, Afghanistan now, we serve as ground forces. So we kind of see, unique perspective from the Marine Corps. You see both the ground force perspective and the sea force perspective. In naval forces, I think throughout history, have evolved with the officer having a bit of an elitist, and the enlisted personnel being a bit lower. Rank has its privileges, is a very common thing that you'll hear in the Navy, because you aspire to attain rank and you get more privileges with each rank, and it's almost like you want to take those privileges because that makes other people aspire to come up the ladder to attain the privileges. It's reversed a little bit in the ground forces, with the Navy, in the Marine Corps and the Army, because we consider rank as bringing responsibility more than privilege. It's very rare that you would see a Marine officer or a non-commissioned officer taking more privileges than are given the youngest Marine or soldier. For instance, if you were eating somewhere in the Army and the Marine Corps, we would let the younger soldiers and Marines eat first, because it's just logic. We need to take care of them because they're the ones that are we all serve on the backbone of them. Therefore, their strength is more important than an officer's strength. If I'm sitting in an office, I really don't need to eat as much as that young guy who's out on patrol. There's a certain logic to that.
Right.
In the Navy, it would be expected that officers, the chiefs, would probably get served first because the privilege of rank. So you can see it's just a culturally different way of looking at things. But me personally, I found the Navy way a little bit more distasteful. But that's because of my blue-collar background. So, I've found, the Marine Corps has been a good fit for me over the years.
Sure. Do you think any of your children now are aspiring for military service? I know they're very young. Their ages, Joe, just for...
Little Joe is 11, Chrissy is 9, Rebecca is 6, Anna is 3.
Amazing.
And, so little Joe, of course, says he's going to come into the Marine Corps, but he's got to fit that in between playing in the NBA and the NFL, because he's going to do that as well. I think he's going to be a doctor and a lawyer somewhere in there.
Good, yeah.
So if he can wrap all of that in, then maybe he'll come into the Marine Corps.
That's hilarious.
I'm not holding my breath on him. As for the girls, I don't know if I'd advise, my daughters to come into the Marine Corps.
Right. Are there any women in the Marines?
Oh, quite a few.
Quite a few.
I can't quote you the exact percentage. But,
I was, and I that's just because I don't know. I was thinking about when you were in ROTC there at Duke, if there were many women in the Navy ROTC who were thinking about breaking off. Do you remember back then during your 4 years at Duke?
Actually, we did have one woman that chose to pursue a commission in the Marine Corps, and then at the last minute she bailed out and went to the Navy. I don't know. I think, got to watch what I'm saying.
No, I was just thinking about even that 6 weeks at Officer Candidate School there in Quantico. I was just trying to think about those numbers. And of course, you mentioned the Marines are a department of the Navy, or a department, or a separate...
the men's department,
The men's department. You said, you better be careful. That's right. I'm going to lose some subscribers there. Oh, no, that's right. We've got about 5 minutes, Joe. I think we're running out of time. And, of course, this weekend you're heading back to Iraq. What exactly, or maybe not exactly, what are you doing over there that you feel comfortable talking about, or can you talk about it at all?
I'm on the Multinational Forces West staff. I'm the Deputy G2, which is the intelligence division. So I basically work on the general staff over there.
Right.
Work pretty much like outside of being in Iraq, I think the job itself is more like some of your corporate leadership positions, the kind of things that we do,
right.
Meetings and briefings and video teleconferences, and really all the things that go into managing a large corporation or what go into managing a very large force in Iraq.
Right.
It's mostly the younger guys that are going out on patrol every day. They're really, doing God's work out there in the streets, making a big difference. And the rest of us, it's inherent on us to manage their efforts out there.
Sure,
and
sure.
so the management comes down to 15, 16 hours a day of email meetings, video teleconferences, and
wow.
A lot of the things that you might do wearing a coat and tie in the States, really. It's some long, hard days, but we have made a lot of progress over there. So.
I'm glad you're not wearing a coat and tie today, since you'll be putting it back on as soon as you get back to Iraq, and that is a long trip back. I know that that must be harrowing. Your next time back in the States will be, you expect, next June?
No,
or you'll probably back around Christmas
Yeah,
time?
early. I think after Christmas, probably after the New Year, sometime
Okay.
January or February.
Right.
We're not sure exactly when yet, but I'll be retiring shortly thereafter, probably about June timeframe.
What are you thinking about, Joe, after 20 years in the Marines? Have you begun to think about some of the things you may be interested in? Of course, you not only got your undergraduate at Duke, but an MBA from Boston University.
And Master of Science in Strategic Intelligence that Uncle Sam sent me to get. Very magnanimous of Uncle
I did
Sam.
not know that. Thank you, Uncle Sam. Absolutely. And, of course, Holly Hill Apartments made proud. Joe and you and your parents having been in the same apartment complex that my parents still live in 40 years after they moved in there in 600 LaSalle Street. It's been on, y'all were in 600-4, I guess.
Yep.
We in 600-1
That's right.
forever. I don't think y'all had someone asked the other day about my parents, and my folks have never had a washing machine in their home.
Right.
They use a community washer dryer, and y'all in the even numbers didn't have one either. You had to go to a next building to get.
Everybody else did too at the time. I guess it
still
seems kind of
do.
strange in retrospect, but it wasn't that big a deal at the time.
It's
right
amazing.
downstairs.
I know, that's right. It's amazing. What are some of the things you're thinking about postgraduate? Have you begun to think about that? Some opportunities?
I've been working on my resume, doing some research. It's interesting making the transition from military to civilian, because I think a lot of my peers probably transition to government sector jobs. I'm hoping to transition to a corporate sector job, and we'll see. I mean, I think personally I'd be interested in larger companies like Coke, IBM, Microsoft, Dell, or any of the larger companies, because it gives me a little bit of latitude to move around if I don't find the perfect job right off the bat.
Right.
I'd hate to just hop around from company to company to company looking for the right job. So I think it probably behooves me to try to move in with one of the larger companies. But
sure.
Yeah, we'll just see what kind of opportunity there is out there. I'm looking forward to a new challenge, and just when I get back to Iraq, starting the interview process and just seeing what that holds for me.
That's a big deal, and you're sure that you don't want to spend another 20 years in the Marine Corps. Some folks, what's the longest amount of time you can spend in a service, or at least
40 years would be
right?
the longest, but that would depend on the age in which you came in and what rank and stuff. For me, as a lieutenant colonel, I could stay in for 30 years, and if I came in zone and got promoted to colonel, you could stay in for 30 years. You'd have to make general to stay in past that. Mm-hmm. But ironically, I mean, I didn't, as we said on the first segment,
yesterday morning,
I never really anticipated coming into the military, much less the Marine Corps, much less staying in for 20 years. It just kind of happened because it's been fun, it's been challenging. But yeah, I mean, I really am looking forward to just starting another career, because I want to do something different. At the sum total of my life, I want to be able to say, I did something else as well as, having a blast in the Marine Corps for 20 years.
Absolutely, and truly serving your country. And you feel that with everyone around you. This really is a service. I know you talked about the service aspect for the officers to the enlisted in the Marines. Do you feel that it's inherent that everyone has that same service mentality? We are truly serving our country.
That's hard to say. Certainly everyone is serving, but when a young guy comes to the Marine Corps, when you're 17, 18 years old, very few of them actually are thinking service per se. Most of them are probably thinking adventure, and that's fine too, because quite honestly, myself coming in at 20, 21 years old, service was not at the forefront.
Right.
Adventure was it. Adventure, travel, excitement, challenge, all those things. Those are really the lure of the Marine Corps for the young folks. Mm-hmm. Service is something that you kind of come into and you appreciate once you're in. I think, at least for me personally, I was a major before I actually realized I'm serving, and realize that it was an honor to serve rather than it's just fun to be in the Marine Corps and the challenge and things like that. So. Yeah, I mean, I think, it makes us sound a lot better if we say everyone's coming in magnanimously, to serve, altruistically. But there's a lot of challenge. There's a lot of draw. The Marine Corps draws a lot of folks in for reasons other than just being altruistic. I mean, it gives a lot, to the troops. You get the ability to get out there. These are hugely challenging jobs. They really test the utmost of your ability. When you walk out of the Marine Corps, you really know what your abilities and what your limitations are, and that's a lot that you gain outside of the service that you provided. So yeah, I think it's a mix of you get in what you put what you put forth in the Marine Corps, you get it back.
Those are great words, Joe. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. I'm sorry we run out of time. We'll let you get back to Lejeune and back to Iraq this weekend.
Oh, I can't wait, Craig.
Have a safe trip. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Lieutenant Colonel Joe Paschall coming up next. If you were seeing Joe Paschall for the first time this morning, that'd be a real travesty. It'd be a travesty because you would have missed that great story that Joe shared about his dad, Ted, getting two amazing things out of the trash can. Not only an application to Duke University, but an application to the Naval ROTC. Take the time. This is real easy. I know if you don't go online often, you can go to the library, you can go to a friend's house, visit CarolinaPeople.com. That's www.carolinapeople.com, and click on the July 19th, yesterday's interview. It's a tremendous interview. Learn a little background on Joe Paschall, but the excitement, he didn't talk a lot about his mom, probably because he loves his mom so much. He sees her all the time. But he had the opportunity to highlight Ted, and just like his kids now, thinking about the excitement of getting their dad back next June and being able to see him all the time and get involved on sitting on the sidelines or sitting there at the gymnasium watching gymnastics or the dance school class, as well as the thrill for his wife and mom to get him back to the States full time. It'll be a great thing. Take the time, go online, CarolinaPeople.com, and check out these two amazing interviews.